fortnight, the small matter of a credit ratings announcement by Moody's ratings agency awaits. This could either see Mboweni kick off his term on the back foot or with a slight reprieve. Peter Attard Montalto, the head of capital markets research at Intellidex, helps us paint a much clearer picture now from London via Skype. Peter, thank you so much for your time. I suppose the message here will be clear that no matter what happens, whether they do move or they don't, the sentiment will be around growth.
Exactly, but let's remember we have a new finance minister. We also have a new ratings analyst. Lucy Villa is the new analyst at Moody's. Previous analyst Susanna has left. And basically, I think it's going to be a challenge before the MTVPS. We're expecting maybe no rating at all this evening. They could just bring out a research report. But either way, the general consensus being no change in the rating this evening, waiting to see how new Minister Tito Mboweni settles in, waiting for the MTVPS, and waiting maybe for some more growth data to see if there was any pickup in the second half of the year, which probably will be a small pickup and nothing particularly dramatic for the rating agencies.
Moody's have generally been behind the curve, one would say, considering how the other ratings agencies have downgraded South Africa into non-investment grade, particularly in 2017. Do you think their credibility still stands firm at this point, or perhaps it's something that we can call into question?
Well, it's been very frustrating, clearly, over the last couple of years, looking at rating agencies, trying to forecast rating agencies, has been sort of a very sort of odd exercise, but so important for South Africa, given the potential for outflows. Now, the difference between Moody's and Fitch and S&P has been that Moody's has placed a much, much higher weighting and importance on crossing this boundary, in part now because they are the last, because their move would trigger huge outflows. And I think that really is the wrong view. They should be making a very firm judgment only on South Africa's credit, outlook, its ability and willingness to pay, as opposed necessarily to the implication of their ratings per se. So if there's a criticism, I think it would be around that. But Moody's is slowly getting there. They're slowly abandoning this sort of long-term idea that growth can be 4%, 5%, 6%. And that's why they are on this path towards downgrading.
Some of the other ratings agencies moved particularly because of a change in finance minister, yet continue to say that it's not about the minister or the person in that position, but certainly what the policies are. Do you think that they will stand firm and say that as long as the right policies are in place and that the growth trajectory and debt, particularly at Eskom, is kept down, that perhaps there is hope for South Africa and that they'll wait until the medium-term budget policy, if not budget, next year?
Exactly. And I think there needs to be sort of, for Moody's sort of risk-averse point of view, more exposition on what the stimulus plan is actually going to mean in terms of practicalities, the job summit implementation, all these sort of things. There'll be plenty of excuses, I think, for them to wait, but they are losing patience. And you saw that from Moody's and from all the agencies after the stimulus package, basically saying this wasn't really a stimulus package as normally conceived. So the view is starting to shift, that the reform potential is more limited. But I think on the specific issue of the minister, remember the downgrades last time from S&P were on a very serious attack on the institution of National Treasury. The appointment of Tito Mboweni actually is the reverse. I think he's going to be very good at re-establishing Treasury's centre of gravity within government around policy making. But really, Treasury can't put forward serious reforms without political space. And that really, I think, means that the appointment of the minister will only have a limited impact on the rating.
Sentiment, as you say, around Tito Mboweni is more positive than it was around previous finance ministers, particularly Malusi Gigaba. But now my question becomes, though, that the medium-term budget policy statement won't necessarily be his speech. The investment summit that comes shortly after that will certainly see him take on the ideals, perhaps, of Nhlanhla Nene and the ministry before he even came to the fore. Do you think he stands the task of being a caretaker minister before we get to next year's elections?
In a very small way in the short term, I think clearly he can't totally rewrite the MTVPS. It's already been agreed to by sort of government structures, but he can put some spin and his own unique style on the actual speech. But no, I think Tito Mboweni is a big macro thinker. As we've seen coming out in some of his tweets, some of that can be quite controversial. I think we give him benefit of the doubt on those tweets for the time being until he can come out and explain about them. But actually, he is a big macro thinker, unlike actually some of his predecessors. And I think that is going to make him an interesting character. But no, I mean, there are much bigger problems here around the space of political capital, which is a much bigger question around what's going on in the ANC at the moment, which will constrain him, even if he does have the right sort of policy views.
Peter, very finally, we've been speaking about implementation of reforms in order to help South Africa to decrease its debt positions, in order to perhaps help the fiscus a whole lot more. Are we headed in the right direction now? We've just had a job summit. We're set to put in an investment summit as well. It seems the task of fiscal consolidation is a firm one for South Africa. But do you think that we're going to take on that position sufficiently? And are we on the right track?
Well, the fiscal position really is a very limited sort of way of looking at it. It's a very tight fiscal position that's ultimately beholden to growth. So the growth part of your question is indeed the most important. And depending on how you want to look at the growth, the job summit and the stimulus plan, it depends on your scope. If you are only having the very low bar and low threshold of wanting to get back to 2%, which let's remember is zero per capita income growth, then yes, these were both fine and will help us get there. But I think that's a vastly inadequate hurdle and sort of far too low expectations. We should be talking about getting growth back to 4, 5, 6%. And then you need a very structural shift in South Africa's economic model. And that certainly isn't on the table at the moment.
Peter Attard Montalto, always appreciate chatting to you from Intellidex there as we unpack that Moody's decision expected around 10 p.m. this evening. And of course, that MTBPS, which is expected on October the 24th. Tito Mboweni's first midterm budget policy statement as finance.